Today I'm working on my old Strat copy. It's actually a cork copy from probably about 30 years ago or so. And I wanted to change out the pickups and work on the electronics. But one of the main things I wanted to do was experiment with the grounding and shielding. I used to work for NASA back in the days after I got my college degree, which is in electronics, by the way. And one of the things we had to deal with over and over and over again was proper grounding and shielding, not only on the spacecraft, but on ground control electronics and all of the other equipment that we had to work with. And the general mistake that was made was when you're working with sensors, how do you shield your sensors to be able to get rid of the static that gets picked up at the sensor end? And most of the time, like in this case with modern guitar electronics or electronics from all the way back in the early days of Stratocasters and whatnot, the shielding is done in a way that's not really in keeping with the proper way to shield a sensor or a detector of any kind. So what I thought I'd do is, while I'm redoing the electronics on my guitar here, is also take a stab at redesigning basically the grounding and shielding. And I'll show you what I mean as we go along here. But basically what I plan to do is I'm only going to ground the shielding at the pickups themselves, because these are the sensors of our system here. And then I'll have a separate grounding point for the rest of the signal ground. And so I'll show you how to do that. But right now all I'm doing is just a little fit check here. I had to do some adjustments to the holes where the pickups fit and also where the electronics fit. Like I said, this is an old cork copy, probably made in Japan or China years ago, and so they use some of the cheap electronics that are smaller than our standard CTS pots, and so I bought some CTS pots and changed out some of the modified some of the holes here. Also, the selector switch slot wasn't big enough to accommodate a real switch for a Stratocaster. So I'll show you how I get the electronics worked out here in just a moment, as I put the components back onto the plate here. How we have our controls all installed and the pickups installed. I'll go into a little bit of how the electronics are going to be. Normally what you would see is the back of the pots used as a place for the grounding to be made. In my case, I'm not going to do that. Since we're talking about shielding here, what we want to do is any of the radiation that comes into the guitar from whatever direction, and you would expect typically from the top, but anyway, what we want to do is take any of that external noise from lights, especially like in this case we have a compact fluorescent light up inside here. We want to take all of that noise and we want to drain it down to the ground and short it to where the ground is on the guitar at the sensor itself. And of course here are our pickups, our sensors in this case. And so I had to replace the wires coming off of each of the pickups so that I would have a shielded wire coming off, a shielded cable coming off of each of the pickups. These are 2-wire, the 2 gray guys. And this is actually a 4-wire because I have actually a humbucker in the bridge position. So the minor problem here, minor design problem, is I can't get the ground from the circuit all the way up to the points where each of the sensors are, but I can bring those grounds back, tie them together, and I'm going to use a point on the pot, one of the connections that is going to ground on the first pot, on the volume pot, of course. I'm not going to tie it to the shell of the pot because that is going to be where my shielding is. As you can see, the back of the pot, the metal casing, covers a small portion of the electronics in this case. For this is just the resistive element in the potentiometer itself. And so what I want to do is tie this to the shield that is in each of these guys, and then tie the grounds all to this point. And so what that will do is get my grounding all the way up as far as I can, close enough to the sensors, so that the potential is all the same. And so if there's any change, any noise impinging on my system here, it'll be grounded at the sensors, at my pickups. And so that will take care of it, because the typical way of grounding a guitar pickup like this is everything is kind of glommed together, and the shielding doesn't go all the way up to the pickups themselves. You have an exposed ground wire, and in this case it will not, because it will be inside of a shield. Any noise that comes in will hit the shield first. It will get shorted down to the ground at the pickup itself, and so that should take care of some of the buzzing and noise picked up from light bulbs and whatever else. And then that ground is going to come out and hit this point here, and all the other grounds in the circuit itself will end up at this point. So what we were trying to do is get the potential between our signal and our ground to contain only the difference between what is picked up on each of the pickups, between the positive and negative lines going to each of the pickups. Unfortunately, it's a little bit of a compromise in what I'm talking about here, because of course we can't shield over the exposed signal wires that are coming from the pickups when we get to the switch. However, everything's a little bit of a compromise, and that's just kind of how the way you have to go about working in electronics, and particularly in gear such as guitars. You have to deal with what you have. But anyway, I'm going to get into some of the soldering part now and start putting this guy together. Now the next part we're going to do on this project here is, of course, wire things up. As you can see, I have the pickups installed now, and I've installed the wires, the shielded cables. You can't really see the detail in here, but to explain to you, the shield wires and the ground wires are kept separate all the way down, and the shield and the ground are tied only at the pickups. Okay, here's the shield wire right here, and the ground wires are still separate in their own bundles. Now I also left the shield on a little bit to show you how this thing looks. There's a foil shield, and you can see gives you good coverage around the cables. I cut this one off, cut the shield off of this one, so all I have is the pigtail for the shield now. So the next thing I'm going to do, and I'll bring the camera in close so you can see how I do it, is wire this guy up. Now I need to get to the 5-position switch, and I will need to take a shielded pair and take it down to my volume pot. Of course, things get a little bit complicated when I'm hooking up my tone controls here, because there's only a signal ground that goes to here, and the way the signal gets to ground is through a capacitor. But I'm just going to run the signal inside shielded cable, and that should take care of the issue of any shielding or any noise that gets into the circuit at this point. So let's get to it. A quick check you want to do before you actually get to soldering your pickups, and especially when you have a case like mine where I have actually a humbucker in the bridge position. Make sure you have things wired up correctly. You want to make sure the polarity of your pickups, they're going to be going in the same direction, so that the signal, when one pickup is positive, they're all going in the positive direction, so the signals combine correctly. If you have one going negatively, then of course that will subtract from your signal, and there are some folks who like to do that to put their pickups out of phase. But in this case, I don't want them out of phase. But even so, you'll need to do a check just to make sure you know which direction the signal is going to be going. this pickup here that I'm actually connected to is my neck pickup. And so let me set my meter so that you can actually see it while I test it. Okay, now I take my tweezers, my metal, and get next to the, get up against the pickup. And now I just pull it away real quick. And you'll see I get the correct indication. So when I go to the pickup, I get negative, and when I pull away, I get a positive voltage. You can see that the positive and negative is indicating over here on the far left. Okay, at this point I've got the circuit all wired up together. Point out a few things here for you. I put this little anti-tone sucking circuit in years ago, and so I just put it back into my guitar. Here's my capacitor for my tone controls, and I'm just going to fold this guy over so that he's out of the way. That's a 0.1 microfarad right there. And as you can see, my tone line here is actually using a bit of the twisted shielded cable here, or just actually it's just double wires. I don't even think it's twisted in there. I didn't buy the twisted stuff. Anyway, so you can see my shielded wire here, and the shield goes down and attaches at the volume control. And you can see they're connected to my capacitor here, and my capacitor is running down to my ground. Now the little white pieces here are all shrink tubes so that I can make sure my components are isolated, or insulated, excuse me. And right here is a wire connecting up my shields. So you see there's a wire here, there's a wire under here from the shield inside this piece for my tone controls. And then the shield wire, the opposite end of the shield wire that goes to my tone controls, I now have connected down here to my volume pot. So as I had mentioned before, you want all of your shields connected together and going out into one point on each of the pickups, coming out and grounding themselves at the pickup end. So all of these are isolated from the ground line. My ground line here is black. It's the black line. Obviously this is not a ground line, that just goes to the tone control, but a little compromise on the signal and ground wire color choice here. But anyway, the ground line here goes in through this piece of shielded wire and ends up here. So in order to get my output to my jack, I want to take my output from this terminal here and ground here, and I will bring in yet another shield and attach it here, and that will be the shield from the output jack. And once I get that wired up, that's pretty much the whole circuit, and then I can install it into the guitar. And of course I have to take my shielded cable and run it through the hole to get to the jack, and there's a ground wire that comes up from the bridge, actually from the claw underneath with the tremolo, and I will attach that to this point here. Here's my output jack, and as you can see I have the ground and signal wires soldered in, but you see there's no shield here. This is where the shield begins, and so the noise that comes into the guitar will hit the shield at some point in here, and all along the signal cable, of course. But from here to the pickups, this is where the signal shield begins, and it will end and get grounded at the pickups. All right, last wire to go. This is my signal wire. You can see I have my shield wire coming in and hitting the volume pot. That's from the jack. And so I'll just solder this guy in here, and we'll be ready to roll. Okay, now that I've got the guitar all together, let's see how it sounds. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. There's my neck pickup. Middle pickup. And the bridge. All nice and bright. Try my tone control. Take all the highs out of there. So there we go. Now I tested out the noise. Unfortunately, my before video didn't work. The camera decided that its SD card would have an error, and so I lost the video to that. However, I did check my guitar out against this stock Fender 12 string. Same pickup configuration, 3 single coils. And I didn't open it up to make sure that the shielding was the same, but it doesn't really matter at this point. I couldn't really tell much of a difference between the two regarding noise. However, this in my home studio here is not very noisy anyway. So anyway, that was it's a nice sounding guitar as it is, and I may have taken a dent out of some of the noise anyway, but at least it has better wiring in it anyway. But now it's got the grounding and the shielding done the right way, and in a noisier circumstance, maybe it will be a little bit quieter. I'll have to test it out and maybe get back and let you know. Subscribe down below, and hopefully we'll talk to you in a little bit.